thank you for joining us at the ever-improving No Soundbites Allowed podcast. My name is Michael Vasquez. We thank you for joining us in this adventure of describing the politics that go on in our nation on a personal and local level as often as possible, giving you, the audience, more than just 30 seconds to understand what's going on in our nation. We look forward to joining you as we go. Just sit back, enjoy the ride. Please remember, if you like the episodes, like it, share it, let other people know, and if you can, please donate, even if it's $2, even if it's $5, because it all makes a difference. We thank you, and here we go. Well, hello everybody, and thank you for joining us again. This is Michael Voss, the Dragon of the Southern Tier, here on your favorite podcast, the No Soundbites Allowed, where we try and sum it all up, as I just mentioned. So today I'm going to jump right into it because there's a lot of information, just a lot of things that are going on, and I want to get right to it because this is a very interesting day. There's a lot of news out there, and even some breaking news that we're going to get into, and I want to get into a conversation that I had yesterday on air on WNBF. I want to talk about what we're seeing happening, just not only on the New York 22nd race, but just a bunch of races and some of the interesting reactions we've seen this week on some of the news that's been breaking. So without much further ado, what I want to get into is the very first thing that we're going to talk about here. There it is. And I love my sound effects. Newsflash. Newsflash. That's right. The newsflash is about what just came out today, and people are finding out about it, and that's with Nancy Pelosi. Now, it seems Nancy Pelosi had made a trip, and this is something that we see happen. Speaker Ryan had been in Binghamton just a day or 2 days ago, and so we've heard that. And it's normal in the end of an election season that we see that the leader of the House and the leader of for both parties, so the Speaker and the leader of the minority, will go out and try and stump for many of the candidates that are out there, especially if they have any tight races. And that's what happened with Nancy Pelosi. Even though she's from California, she went down to Miami, Florida, to the Florida 26. And when she went down there, she was going to be speaking for a candidate, a Miss Mucarsel-Powell, who's running for the Florida 26, and she was trying to promote her. Now, she brought one of her friends along with her, and that friend that she brought along with her is Barbara Lee of the California 13th. Now, why that's a big deal is Barbara Lee has been a big supporter of Fidel Castro. She met him. She's been a proponent of starting relations with Cuba. And a lot of the Cuban Americans who have lived through the violence of Fidel and his takeover of Cuba and the communism that they brought in that killed so many people and sent so many thousands of people into the ocean, many of them dying, to try and get over to Florida to be refugees from that regime. And when Fidel died, Barbara Lee was very emotional about it and making her comments and how she praised Fidel Castro, a brutal dictator who instituted communism in Cuba and killed thousands, tens of thousands of Cubans, and has left their nation in the 1950s while the rest of the world has moved on. It's a big problem. And so many of the Cuban Americans took great offense at the fact that Barbara Lee would be there. And they had no great love for Nancy Pelosi either and her ideas, both in taxes and immigration and just a whole lot. And so we saw that, and this happened yesterday, and it's been reported today, and you go to Twitchy, that's where I've got that source, one of the photos, and there's a video of actually the protesters confronting Nancy Pelosi as she was entering one of the campaign offices for Miss Mucarsel-Powell. And it was exactly what you would see coming from or what we have seen against Pam Bondi, against Ted Cruz, that's his name. I couldn't think of it for a second. Ted Cruz most recently, and so many others, where we've seen people confronted as they're just going about their regular day doing regular things. Now, this was isolated to an actual political event, but very much it's reminiscent of exactly what we saw with people pounding on the doors of the Supreme Court because they didn't like Brett Kavanaugh. And it's very much the contingent of Republicans doing exactly what the Democrats have shown us they expect to see happening and what they've been doing over and over again. Except this case actually was more political based as opposed to the other incidents which have been more personal, dealing with people in restaurants and in stores and in their homes. This was actually at a political event. So there is a bit of a difference there, but very much still the same thing. And like I said, there is video of this. I can't play that video because of the language that was used. It is foul language involved in that confrontation with, or that protest against Nancy Pelosi and Miss Barbara Lee. And as it wound up, the candidate actually didn't even show up. Barbara Lee didn't even show. And they locked the doors. Many of the supporters that were there in Florida for the Florida 26, they weren't able to get in because the doors were locked, and the secret police and, the Secret Service and police were not allowing anyone in, and it was very confrontational. So is this the new nature of politics? This is what Democrats have ushered in. When we hear Maxine Waters saying, go out and confront people, when we hear Democrats not denounce this and not and feed into this environment of confrontation and aggressive confrontation and escalating confrontation. And I'll be talking about Matt Ryan and others who are looking at groups like Antifa and supporting them and saying that these are positive things and that people need to be involved in that it's a good thing. Well, this is the result of that. Now we're seeing on the right that they're starting to take on the same tactics that Democrats have been using for most of this year, well, actually since the summer, and we're seeing this escalate. This is not going to end well. I don't like this. I have to say, I understand protests and everyone should protest. The more aggressive protests that we're seeing, these where we're seeing buildings beat on or Antifa breaking buildings and getting in fights and destroying property and stopping people from being able to do their job and just live their lives, I think that's wrong. And I don't care if that's on the right or the left, it doesn't really matter. It's still the same thing, and the same result is that we see an escalation and it just gets worse and worse. And this brings us into not just a conversation or a dispute of words, but it's escalating into something far, far different and far more dangerous. And I'm really scared about this. And I know Lindsey Graham has mentioned it and many others have mentioned it, and I'm mentioning it now. I know Democrats are going to turn around and they're going to call this a mob. And they're going to turn around and say that this was such a violent altercation, how horrible this altercation was. Well, guess what? This is exactly the same thing that you have been doing for months and advocating for months. And it's no less of a mob than the mobs that we have seen on the left. This is where they are bringing the politics. And, there's only so far and so long that you're going to see one side using a tactic continuously. And if that tactic is being lauded by a side, then the other side's going to do it again as well. And they're going to say, well, it's the same thing you just did, so you can't denounce it. And that's what's going to happen with this. I mean, I think it's great that Nancy Pelosi got to get a taste of what the results have been, the seeds that were sown by Maxine Waters. And so that the Democrats can get a touch of the reality that they are, Maxine Waters and Nancy Pelosi, they've been in for about 25, 30 years now, 40 years that they've been in office. They're completely detached from the public. They need this dose of reality of what their words are inciting in people across this nation and how that's going to have a negative influence on Democrats as much as it is on Republicans. They are bringing this on. And it's a sad thing. And they need to stop this on their side, as well as Republicans have been saying this needs to stop. But the Democrats need to stop. They've been the ones promoting this and pushing it. They need to stop this. And their leadership needs to say it has to stop and end this so that we can go. And then we'll see the same reaction and continued reaction from Republicans, and that will allow things to simmer down a little bit. Because I know it's an emotional time. It's election. We're right on the corner. Everyone's very hyper about it, but there's a limit to what should be hyper and what's still civil, and the lack of civility. And I went into and I did a whole thing on that just a couple of days ago, and I'll keep a link at the end of the end of the podcast in the description, so you'll be able to see that. So that's one thing I wanted to talk about, and I just find it interesting. And this is something that we're seeing. It's just insane. And I'm looking at my notes here because that was on the 18th, and we had a similar event. I believe it was on September 18th as well. So Nancy Pelosi's getting a little bit of the fruits of the seeds that were sown by Maxine Waters and so many others. And so it's just sad. It really is sad. And that kind of brings me into another thing that's kind of interesting, because we see the seeds that have been sown by Elizabeth Warren. A lot of Democrats right now are reaping what they have sown and what they have put out there, and they thought they were going to get away with it. And we're not seeing that anymore. I mean, Elizabeth Warren, I got to show you this. This is really funny. It's a meme, and it's off of Facebook. And I don't usually like memes because they leave out so much information. They're so edited, and they're meant to get an emotional reaction. So I don't put a lot of weight into them, and I think usually they're horrible things. But this one is meant to be funny, and it is funny. And so I want to share that with you. And you got to see this. Elizabeth Warren is 99.902% white. Ivory Soap is 99.44% pure. Pocahontas is whiter than Ivory Soap. Elizabeth Warren is whiter than Ivory Soap. That is funny. That is just really, really funny. Okay, I think it's just hilarious. I enjoyed that, and I shared it on my Facebook page because I had to, because that was just great. And I do want to give a shout out to the guy Robert Darling, who actually originated that, or at least to my knowledge, he was the one who originated that meme. But I think it's funny, and it goes to a point, and that's something I really wanted to talk about, because Elizabeth Warren is about as white as it gets, as much as anyone else in the nation. And that's not a negative against white people. I don't care. But the point is that she has been using this idea, this unconfirmed and now unreal idea that she's an American Indian, which isn't true. Not at all. I mean, at the very best, you got to go back 10 generations, and it might sort of possibly could be somebody in the family who might have been American Indian. That means that I'm about, by that, I'm Samoan, okay? I'm probably as much as she is an American Indian, I am a Samoan native, or maybe I'm an Aborigine. I mean, it's just ridiculous. There is no connection there. It's not real, okay? And you can't say and declare and should not be recognized as some kind of minority group just so you can reap the benefit of that declaration, okay? This goes into that whole idea where, and we've heard it earlier this year and for a while now, that, well, you are what you believe you are. That's a very liberal, progressive ideology where people are, if you think you're a transgender, you're transgender. If you think you're a woman and you're a man, well, you're still a woman. If you think you're a cat, well, then you're a cat, even though you're a human being. And, if Elizabeth Warren thinks that she's an Indian, well, she's an American Indian, even though everything, all proof says that she is not, well, then everybody is anything that they bloody well want. And we can all, and we should all reap the benefits of that. Let's go for, I want to be an American Eskimo. And let me get the benefits from the government for being that indigenous population that is very small and a minority, and they get benefits for that from various agencies and write-offs and taxes and such. Let me go and put myself as an American Eskimo, because why not? If Elizabeth Warren can be an American Indian and she can get benefits from the universities that she's gone to, possibly from taxes, from beneficial review on loans and so forth, why shouldn't? Why shouldn't we all do it? There should be nobody who's any one box anymore. There's got to be like 50 boxes on every time they say, what's your race? There's got to be 50 boxes, and everyone's going to have to go down to the 10th person, the 10th generation of their family back. Well, I'm 5% this, 1% that, and some 0.01% or 0.001% of whatever else. I'm 1/1000th, of Japanese. I don't know. This is stupid. I mean, it's just ridiculous at every level. But what we haven't heard anyone say, and I think is really important, why isn't anyone calling for Elizabeth Warren to repay any benefit that she received for making this false claim? I mean, every Indian nation, the Cherokee Indians, and all of the American tribes have all rejected her claims. All of them have found this to be insulting. And no one is backing her up. No one. Her tests don't back her up. No one does. And the test, by the way, doesn't even show that she's an American Indian. It actually shows she may be Mexican. Okay, which has nothing to do with the Native American Indians, really. She may be Mexican based on the actual data she got. But that's besides the point. She's made claims and she's received benefits, both politically and very likely economically, in terms of getting the jobs that she has. She should make some kind of reparation for this false acknowledgement of race that she does not have. She has literally used race for her personal benefit and her political benefit. And that is wrong, okay? That's the same thing as using, when we see that Heitkamp goes out there and uses women and reveals their name. Senator Heitkamp went out and she doxed a bunch of women who were survivors of sexual assault, did not want their names published, and taking a page right out of Senator Dianne Feinstein, she went and she actually published those names, made them public, and revealed these women who did not want to be revealed. She was using the women to make a point politically for her advantage, and she damaged people's lives, and she hurt them. And that's what Dianne Feinstein did with Christine Ford. And now we're seeing this happen again with Elizabeth Warren. Let's think about this, folks. This is a bad situation. There is no positive here. And Elizabeth Warren should absolutely make some kind of reparation, some kind of payment, some kind of give back and make up for what she has done. I would like to see that with Ms. Heitkamp too, and I'd love to see that with Dianne Feinstein. And because when we hear Democrats saying, well, we're all for minorities, well, yeah, they're all for using minorities apparently, because they're repeatedly doing this. They're using women, they're using American Indians, they use black people all the time. So we need to see this change, and this is something that's wrong. And I really want to see that stop. But that's what I was thinking about that. Now, before I go even further, let me take a quick break. Hopefully that all made a lot of sense, and I think it's very interesting, especially the breaking news about Nancy Pelosi, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. Is this the way that politics should be going? Should we have these kind of confrontations everywhere? Should this be the norm going forward, that we're going to have any politician shouted down, trapped in buildings, run out of restaurants? It doesn't matter if they're a Democrat or a Republican. Is this what we're going to do from now on? Is this what we have as part of America and part of the process? That we're going to chase down and run out people just because we don't agree with them politically? Is that the way we should be going forward? Because that's what the Democrats have planted that seed. Is that what we should be doing in this nation? Because I disagree with that. And I disagree with having the other thing that Democrats have planted a seed. Should we make race this random thing that we're going to go, and I don't mind that we don't count race. I don't think we should be emphasizing race. I really don't. But should we allow individuals to use race for their political benefit and their financial benefit in many cases, just because they say so? Just because today I decide I want to be whatever it is I want to be. Are we going to accept that? Does that count for gender? Letting men walk into women's bathrooms? just because they want to be in there and they say that they're at that moment feel like they're a woman? Are there no separation? Are there no rules on this? Are we just able to do whatever it is we feel like at any given moment just because we say we feel like it? Is this what we want for America? I don't think so, but I want to ask that question because I think that's wrong. I think these are all wrong things and they should stop immediately, and we should be very vocal about it. But that's my thought. But before I go any further, let me take a quick break. Now, the setup is a little different with the software, still working some kinks out of it. So I'm not going to be able to hear you or make any sounds. But we're going to go into that break, and then I'll come back, and we'll talk a little bit more about what's happening, something a little bit closer to home for me in the New York 22nd in Binghamton and Broome County. But I think you'll see that this is a corollary, again, something we're seeing throughout the nation, and we'll talk a little bit about that in just a moment. So with that said, let me get you over. Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me back here. This is Michael Voss at the ever popular, ever happy No Soundbites Allowed podcast. I thank you for joining me here and enjoying this time with me. And I want to also, by the way, I forgot to mention that I appreciate and I thank each and every one of you for being here and being here at this event and just checking it out and talking with me or listening to me about this, and I look forward to having more comments. And I'll be doing some podcasts live on Facebook. I'll be doing it on YouTube, just working through the software to make sure I can get it done right. Still a work of progress to a certain extent. But I do thank you, and I do appreciate your sticking around. And I thank the Gypsies that was there playing live here in Binghamton, New York, in downtown Binghamton. It was a great concert. And I'll have some other musicians and other music later on. Now, we've been talking about some of the things. What's being reaped is being sown. The seeds that you've planted, rather it should be the other way around. What you sow is what you reap. But we're seeing that the seeds that have been planted in so many different areas and so many different directions in our politics right now are coming together and coming to fruition, and that fruition is negative. It's bitter. It's a bitter fruit that's being born, and it's sad because it doesn't need to be this way. We don't have to agree. No one ever has to agree. You know, I'm a conservative Republican, and people hate that because I'm black. That's wrong. That's the wrong reason. If you disagree with my politics, that's fantastic. Disagree with my politics all day long. I don't care. We can have disagreements. We can have conversations. But you shouldn't hate me because I'm a Republican and a conservative and I'm black. That's not reason. My race has nothing to do with my political beliefs. That has to do with my education, my experiences, my understandings of laws and how they actually are put into function and work in our nation and whether they have positive or negative results. That's about politics, and that's about law, but it has nothing to do with what my race is. That's just an inherent fact. I was born with a permanent suntan. So what? Why do we care? We shouldn't, not in 2018. But that's not exactly the way that many people see it, especially in the social justice arena, in the progressives and the far left. And we're seeing that they've been, the far left, that's Maxine Waters trying to push this idea that we have to confront people in their daily lives about things that really don't affect, whether you're going to eat in a restaurant or not. That's just as superficial as coming after me for being black and a Republican. That's silly. It's stupid. It makes no sense. One has nothing to do with the other. And we should all recognize that. But they don't. And when we're seeing that people are using race and minorities and women and ethnicities to try and get some kind of political advantage, that's not a positive. That doesn't advance anyone's issues or any ideas. All that does is separate us and divide us and make us less capable of having a conversation. And a matter of fact, one of the cases about that, and that brings me to the thought about Antifa. Now, everywhere we've seen Antifa, we've seen violence. We've seen Antifa shut down conversation. We've seen Antifa try to eliminate the ability for people to have ideas and share those ideas and discuss those ideas. They are a violent group of thugs who go out and try to silence people through intimidation and their violence. We've seen it in Portland. We've seen it in Berkeley. We've seen it throughout this entire nation. Everywhere they go, this is the same thing. And we saw it most recently in New York City. In case anyone forgot that, just about a week ago, what we saw was this. We saw that Antifa went out and they attacked the New York GOP headquarters, the Republican Party headquarters. And we can see the damage there. They put glue into the locks. We see the spray paint on the doors. They broke a bunch of windows. And they made a threat, a very clear and present threat that they were coming back and there is more violence to come. They are not done. So that's a very scary thought, that they want to institute more violence. And you can see it on my website where I have that, and I'll go into that article in just 1 second. But that's a very troubling thought. We're seeing this group, a far left activist thug group, that are going out there and they are advocating violence, and they use violence routinely just because they want to make their point. And they try and justify it, and the people who support them try and justify it. Now, I have to ask you, and this is, and Antifa, by the way, is recognized as a domestic terrorist organization in the United States. They are the far left and they are terrorists. That's not me saying it. That's Homeland Security has designated Antifa as domestic terrorists, which probably would also apply to political leaders of tomorrow and certain other far left organizations, which Antifa intermingles with on a regular basis. Here in Binghamton, Citizen Action, Black Lives Matters, Antifa, political leaders of tomorrow share many of the same members and leadership. So it's not a shock. You probably see that in many other parts of the nation as well. But one of the things that's very surprising is, now what you don't see is Antifa as members of any politics. They're part of the Democratic Party, but they are not actually elected to any offices. No one's running on the Antifa ticket. They're not out there saying, I'm a member of Antifa, you should elect me. See, that would be true, except that's not true. Because here in Binghamton and in Broome County, we see that there's a race for the Broome County Sheriff. And I've spoken about this before. There's the incumbent, Sheriff David Harder, who's running for re-election. And there is an opponent. His opponent is the former mayor of Binghamton, who is an avowed far-left activist, a social justice warrior, by the name of Matt Ryan. And Mr. Matt Ryan, who I've known for many years and I've interviewed for many years, and you may hear him say, oh, well, Mike's not an independent journalist. He's right. I'm not. I'm not an independent journalist. What I am is a political commentator, and I'm a Republican conservative political commentator. Never denied that for a day in my life. And obviously what I'm doing right now is political commentary. He knows that. And he's also actually done many interviews with me. He's done about a dozen interviews with me where I've quoted him many times and we've spoken about many issues. He knows. So for him to say that I'm not news media is a lie, and he knows it because he's done interviews with me as news media. And to say that I'm an independent journalist is a lie because he knows I'm a political commentator and I do news events as well. I just want to address that because he brought that up on air yesterday when I was on WNBF, and I published that entire unedited audio of that entire conversation that I had on WNBF, addressing a lot of issues about bias in the media. And then he came in, and I had a very simple question for him. Antifa, do you support Antifa? Now, I can go into it. Before I go into it, I actually have that recording, and I'm just doing a clip. It's a small clip, and again, I won't be able to hear you. I won't be able to speak over this because it shares the same line I speak on. But I'm going to play that for you, and then when that's done, I'm just going to come right back. But I want you to hear what a individual who's supposedly trying to represent the people of Broome County, as he tries to explain the very simple thing, are you supporting Antifa?
I mean, if you look at
so just one clarification, just I'll let you go on because I don't want to take away Bob's time from questions, but I want to just clarify. So you support Antifa, is that correct?
I support any group that says that they're trying to. Look, Mike, I don't care. I'm not here to answer your questions. I don't.
I'm a voter.
Yeah, you're not voting for me, so what do I care?
I don't know.
Wait,
I'm waiting for your answer.
Matt Ryan, wait a second. Clarify that.
What I'm saying, Mike, is that
wait.
I don't attribute. I would certainly point. I don't condone any violence in any demonstration, and I think Antifa doesn't either, unless they are confronted by other violence. They won't shy away from it. So the other groups that my take on it is the alt-right groups and the fascist groups and the Nazi sympathizers. They come ready for violence, and they showed that the other night when the Proud Boys did what they did, one of those groups. So and they were laughing about it afterwards. They have them on tape laughing about it, kick people in the face and stuff. Don't tell me these are Antifa. I just think it's a different animal. I'm not condoning violence on either side.
A little bit shorter than I thought it was. Okay, so, and I apologize for the moment there. But as we heard from the very words of Matt Ryan, and by the way, the third voice you heard there is the host of WMBF's show, Binghamton Now. His name is Bob Joseph. And Bob was backing me up in the thought that, no, you have to answer this question. So think about that. It's a very simple question. Now, Matt Ryan has already established when he was mayor that he is a member of the far left, and he supports all kinds of protests. He supported the Occupy Binghamton and the entire Occupy movement, even though it put the city at risk on 3 separate ordinances for millions of dollars, potentially, if someone had made a claim against the city. But he supported it, even though it was breaking the law. He went out and he supports social justice and far left activity. He was one of the big proponents of Citizen Action, a far left fringe group here in New York State and in the Binghamton region. And he's stated very clearly on the day that he announced on WMBF that he is going to be, if he gets elected as Broome County Sheriff, he wants to support and he wants to use it as a platform for social justice activism. He wants to be an activist sheriff to promote the ideas, not the laws, the ideas of social justice that have no place in law and have nothing to do with being sheriff. That's what he wants to do. So he wants to use this for his political platform. So he can just spout off and use that office to be able to leverage talking about social justice, which is ridiculous. And no one expects him to win. He's probably going to get maybe 20%. probably a little less. I mean, diehard, straight down the line Democrats usually go, that's about 20% of the vote. I would say he gets somewhere between 17 and 22% of the vote. That's about it. But that's not important. What is important is that this is an individual who wants to be a member of law enforcement, and his main claim to fame is that he wants to support and be an activist actively in his position as a sheriff. And as a sheriff, he supports a domestic terrorist organization. Can you imagine that? A member of law enforcement supports a domestic terrorist organization. That's what the candidate, Matt Ryan, offers. That is terrifying to me. That is a horrible thing, okay? And it makes me very upset. And I just can't understand this. How can we have individuals in this nation who say, you know what, I support domestic terrorism. I support individuals going out and using violence to intimidate other people to believe or to at least go along with certain political philosophy. And that philosophy is based on people's race and gender and ethnic status. That we are looking at, we promote a separation, a discrimination of individuals based on political beliefs and other transitory or inherent values. I mean, that's troubling to me. That's a really troubling idea that we would have a candidate anywhere in the nation, in particular where I happen to live, that would actually say this. And I understand he's trying to justify it. He's trying to use the point of the poor boys and other groups and other individuals. I don't care. That's not a justification. If those individuals were initiating and they were the only ones trying to be violent and Antifa was there and just protesting, that's an entirely different conversation. That's not what's going on. And we've seen Antifa in places, like I mentioned to him, in Berkeley, where there is no one else. There is no counter-violence. There is no group that's there. They're just there to attack people. That's wrong. And he supports that. And he's trying to find a way to say, well, yes, he's saying, I support them, but it's okay. They're different. No, they're not. It's like saying socialism is different this time. No, it's not. It's all the same thing. It doesn't change just because you feel like it's good. He feels, Mayor Matt Ryan feels like that's a great thing. Well, that's great that you feel like that. I don't feel like that. Most Americans don't feel like that. And, even the mayor of Berkeley, the super liberal stronghold, Berkeley, California, does not feel that way. He considers them to be thugs as well. And that's why they've been labeled domestic terrorists. How can we have that? Where are we going in America when we have individuals who are running for law enforcement and elected offices, and they support domestic terrorism, using violence and intimidation to make their views not just heard, but enforced? I mean, that harkens to some very dangerous and troubling times for this nation if that's what's considered the norm. And he wants to argue with me and attack me as a political commentator because, well, you just don't get it. Or, you just don't understand. What don't I understand? Antifa uses violence and intimidation. What is there not to understand about that? That's just wrong. It's just wrong. But he can't seem to grasp that. It eludes him that, being a social justice warrior and enforcing that social justice warrior through a bunch of shock troops called Antifa is not a positive for Binghamton, Broome County, New York State, or the nation of the United States. To justify a group going out and using violence for any reason is not a positive. And he doesn't seem to understand that. That's my puppy Khan in the background. He's a good little boy. Be good. And so he's probably seen a squirrel, and he doesn't like squirrels. Or he doesn't like my conversation about Matt Ryan. He doesn't agree either. He's upset because Antifa is a horrible thing. And I think that's something we all should be able to understand and say, that using violence is wrong. I mean, I've belabored the point, but it needs to be made. And obviously it needs to be made strongly because Matt Ryan is more than willing to go out there. And by the way, he wasn't going to tell the public this until I asked him. He was more than willing to keep it secret that he is a supporter of a domestic terrorist group because obviously no one wants to vote for someone who supports domestic terrorism, I believe. We'll see on the November election. But he wants to go out there. He didn't want to tell anyone that. He wanted to keep that secret. Yeah, he's a member of Citizen Action. Yeah, he's part of the far left. Yes, he's a social justice warrior. But don't ask about whether or not I support domestic terrorism or that I'm willing to allow violence and force to be used against the people I am there, I'm hoping to be elected to represent. Think about that. That's what he's looking to do. He wants to get elected so he can allow, because that was the initial question, are you going to be able to stop? You know the far left, you're a part of the far left. How can you let people know that you would stop groups like Antifa from coming into our community, destroying property, and intimidating people with violence to go with their social justice ideology, which he completely avoided, which I take to mean that he doesn't care. He would be happy to have Antifa and Black Lives Matters and his Citizen Action organization to go forward and use whatever means necessary to enforce the social justice ideas that he believes in, that he will force down people's throats through intimidation and violence, because that's what he thinks is best, regardless of what anyone else thinks. Besides the fact that I can make a case against all of these things, and I am, he doesn't want to have that conversation. No, I just don't understand in the use of that force to require me to believe something, which again goes against the 1972 and 1977 Supreme Court cases. It's a fundamental ideology of our nation, the Constitution. It just destroys all kinds of ideas. I mean, it's so wrong on so many levels, but yet this is the kind of people that are out there. And it so happens they're on the Democratic side. And if they were on the right, I point them out on the right as well and say, hey, they're not good. That's not a good thing either. No one should ever use force to intimidate people into either compliance or compel them to accept a certain thought. That's wrong. And I have to tell you, Matt Ryan, I've known you 5 years, 7 years, 7 years now. No, we disagree vehemently on this. We always have and we always will. And we've done that personally, privately, and publicly, and professionally. So again, I disagree with him. And I'm glad that at least the public got to know what is really behind his run and what's behind, very likely, Citizen Action and the candidates of Citizen Action, like Dan Livingston, an individual who admitted breaking the law on purpose. He actually went on Spectrum News last November and said he actively broke the law. He went on to WMBF about a month ago, which would put it in September, and said he'd do it again, and he willfully broke the law, but he should be elected now as councilman for some reason. He's also a member of Citizen Action. This is the kind of mentality that we see coming out of the far left, Citizen Action in particular in my area, that they're willing to break laws, to use violence and intimidation, to do whatever it takes to get power, to do the things they want to do, whether you like it or not. I think that's wrong. I think voters should be very wary of that, and I hope that they are, and I hope that they reflect that in their votes. Because if not, it's a very troubling place that we're going to in America, whether at the local level in our community or nationally or anywhere in between. That's terrifying to me. So I wanted to go through that and let people know about that. But we're going to take another quick break. I got a little bit more, and then we're all done. But I want to give you a different music group now. This is Adam Ate the Apple, and you should be able to hear this as well. And I hope you enjoy it. Hey there, folks. Yep, still a little bit tricky with the technology here, working it. It's all made by myself, so sometimes it gets a little tricky to work it through. But thank you for joining us here at the No Soundbites Allowed podcast. I hope you're enjoying it, and I thank you. I appreciate the fact that you're here and that you're listening and you're with me through this, and I hope that you are enjoying it. So we've asked a bunch of questions so far today. We're asking about Nancy Pelosi and to the Democratic Party. You know, do you enjoy and do you see why we say many Republicans, many conservatives, many independents, libertarians are all saying that we need to ratchet down this aggressive approach of attacking individuals, and I do consider that an attack, to confront them when they're in a restaurant, when they're in a store, a movie theater, when they're just living out their daily lives, and attacking them because you don't agree with a certain policy that they may or may not have anything to do with. Now that that's being done to Democrats, is this something that makes them pause and say, you know, maybe this isn't the best idea? Do you agree or do you not? I'd love to hear the comments about that, because I surely don't. I don't think that that's a good thing, to attack people on such a personal level about something that's about politics. It lacks all civility, but it also encourages a division of the public. So we've talked a bunch about that. We talked a bunch about further dividing people based on race, by using minorities, by using women, by using ethnicity, using individuals for political and personal and financial gain that we see with Elizabeth Warren and her idea, her feeling that she's an American native Indian, which she's not even close. But she feels like it, so that answers everything, which it doesn't. That doesn't make it better. And that's not a justification, which we keep hearing justifications from a lot of these Democrats, a lot of progressives and liberals and the far left. They justify, well, it's okay we do that because... No, it's not okay. It's not okay when Senator Heitkamp reveals the names of women who have been victims of sexual assault and says, oops, well, that's a mistake, and I'm sorry that I used that for my political gain. No, that's horrible. And you should have done it in the first place. You should have known better. But she didn't. She did it anyway, just like Dianne Feinstein used Christine Ford because of political gain. That's not the way it's supposed to work. At least that's what I believe. Maybe you disagree, but do let me know. And I don't think, when we look at more locally with Matt Ryan and Antifa, I don't think that we should have officials that are running for elected office that support domestic terrorist organizations. I just don't. Now, you know what? Matt Ryan is an American citizen. Of course, he can run for any office that he wants to. At the very least, if he's going to run, even though I won't say that we should block people from doing that, no, but I do want to say that if you're going to support a domestic terrorist organization, that is a critical and vital fact for voters to know about, and you should be at least honest enough to tell those voters that you support a domestic terrorist organization. That's the very least that you owe the voters. That's the very least you can do for them, is to say, hey, just so you know, I support domestic terrorism. I believe that we should have groups of roaming thugs running around the nation that are willing to use intimidation and violence to make you submit to a political philosophy and ideology that you may not like. But I support that. So elect me to office. At least that's honest. That at least has integrity, that you're being honest, that this is the view that you have. This is what you're looking to support. And if you are elected, that's the ideology you're going to advance. It's not enough to say that I'm a social justice warrior, as Matt Ryan said on the air on WMBF, and said that he's going to be an activist as a sheriff. No, because that's not the full truth. And it goes way, way further if you're also saying, I'm willing to support Antifa, an organization that uses intimidation and violence, and you're willing to have them in your home city, which happens to be Binghamton and Broome County. You're willing to welcome them in because you think it's justified. Voters should know about that. Maybe you disagree. Maybe you think they're not a domestic terrorist group, or you think that there's some way we should justify using violence to intimidate people to submit to a political philosophy that they don't agree with. Like, I'm a Republican conservative. Should they use violence to make me submit to the social justice warrior ideology? One, I think that would go badly for you. But two, no, I think that's wrong. But you can let me know. But I did have something else that I wanted to speak about besides those ideas, which I think are very important. I wanted to go, because that ties into other ideologies, individuals who are not being honest, not telling the public the full truth about what's really going on. Yesterday, on October 17th, a certain gentleman, Mr. Richard Hanna, in the photo you'll see he's the one on the left with the blue background, he is supposedly a Republican. And I say that only because I know Mr. Hanna, and he was the reason why I ran in 2013 for Congress. He was the incumbent congressman of the New York 22nd at the time, who would later go on to face Claudia Tenney, who is now the incumbent of the 22nd District, a much better improvement, I believe. And Mr. Hanna, here on the left, just endorsed the Democrat running in the office, who is Mr. Anthony Brindisi, who I've known for 5 years as well. And so you got a supposed Republican supporting very much a Democrat, and a far left Democrat at that. Now, I think that's important because we should understand very clearly what's going on with Mr. Hanna. Mr. Hanna, as I mentioned back in 2015, is very much schizophrenic in terms of his politics. He's been seen many, many times going back and forth on many of the issues. He'll say one thing and do another. He made promises and broke them on a regular basis. I had a lot of issues with him. I don't agree with his support of giving U.S. STEM jobs, that's science, technology, engineering, and math jobs, to foreigners overseas rather than to American citizens, especially since there's a 2-to-1 glut. There's twice as many people with those degrees for every job that's available. Mr. Hanna decided, Richard thought, it's great, let's get some foreigners and give them those jobs. I'm like, wait a minute, there are Americans here who have degrees and should get those jobs first. He disagreed with that, and he thought it was a wonderful idea. He's anti-Second Amendment. Mr. Hanna had a lot of issues. And he had a personal gripe against Claudia Tenney as well. So when we hear that he decides that he wants to support Anthony Brindisi, I have to ask the question, is that actually a good thing for Anthony Brindisi? Because I don't think so. We have an individual who very visibly was acknowledged across the nation as being a turncoat to his own ideologies, to his own party, to his own constituents. He supported Hillary Clinton, which the entire New York 22nd District did not. By the way, President Trump won by 15 points. Hillary Clinton was not well loved in upstate New York for many reasons, including the fact that she promised to bring in 300,000 jobs, and the area lost, in fact, 15,000 jobs instead while she was senator of New York. So there was no great love for Hillary Clinton. But being a representative of the people, Richard Hanna decided to do exactly opposite what the people wanted. And like I said, he also went in the opposite direction of the people in trying to give jobs to foreigners and not giving it to the people that he actually is supposed to represent. So when I see that we hear Anthony Brindisi is now being supported by this gentleman, I don't think that's a positive for Anthony. I truly think that that was one of the worst things that could possibly happen. Because what he's saying is he believes he's getting support of an individual who believes in not supporting the public, in not representing the people fairly or honestly. An individual who did so poorly that he, quote, retired, or in other words, he knew he couldn't be reelected. He was so disliked in Congress, and you can look this up yourself. He had 33 bills in 6 years that he was in office. He only proposed 33 bills. He actually got enacted 4 bills. He named a post office, and he had a procedural bill on how the government does some accounting, and 2 bills on baseball coins. Those are the 4 bills in 6 years that Richard Hanna was able to pass. Don't have to believe me. Look it up. It's out there. And you can just look up his record, and you'll be able to see very clearly he wasn't liked. No one backed anything that he did. So that's not a positive. And if that's the kind of person that Anthony Brindisi is trying to model himself after, and this is what he considers to be a moderate position, well, then that's very troubling, because Congress rejected it. All of his colleagues and peers rejected that. The public rejected that. It didn't represent anyone, and that's why he got forced out. So, no, I don't think that's a positive bit of news. But it's not the only bit of news that Anthony Brindisi has going on. As I was mentioning on WMBF yesterday, remember, some people may recall, I was talking about the red flag legislation. I've done a couple of speeches on it. I've done a lot of research on it for well over 6 months now, and it's an ongoing thing. This is a bill that's being proposed in New York State and has been proposed in it's actually been enacted in 7 states. There's 11 states that are considering it, including New York State, and I'm actively trying to advocate against it, having spoken to the New York State Senate and several of the New York State senators, including Fred Akshar, and showing them the research that I've done on this. All this does is destroy due process, red flag legislation. It takes away the rights of individuals, their Second Amendment, their Fourth Amendment, the Fifth and 15th Amendment rights that you have. It destroys due process. And it basically makes anyone liable for a crime. The accusation equals guilt. This is exactly that. This is another aspect of that very current mindset, that fad in politics, where just because someone accuses you equals guilt, and therefore you're going to be punished as if you had been convicted of a crime, even though no crime exists. But Anthony Brindisi has voted for that, and he's voted for it twice, and he believes in it. He doesn't support the Second Amendment very clearly. Now, he will say in some interviews that he does, and then he will go out onto a speech and say that he does not. And that's been documented by many people. You can search it on the internet. The State of Politics has noted it as well, that he vacillates on whether he supports the Second Amendment or doesn't, but quite obviously in voting for the red flag legislation, he does not. And so he is very much like Richard Hanna in this. He's saying one thing, he's doing another thing. He wants people to believe one thing for the vote, but then he actually goes out and does a very different thing when it comes to actually being in power and actually using the power of the people. And so the NRA, he was one of 11 individuals that in that article that I just highlighted. He was one of 11 individuals that we had written a letter to for the NRA to go out there and correct the rating. Now, prior to this year, Anthony Brindisi had a 97% rating, which is because of his vote against the SAFE Act, which he states was only because he didn't read the bill. He had to vote on it, and he didn't read it, so he voted against it. So that doesn't mean that he didn't support the SAFE Act, which he's come out and said he has different views on. But he had a 97% rating. The NRA looked at his position on red flag legislation, what he's been saying on the campaign trail for the last 18 months, and they decided that, well, his new rating should be 7%. Okay, he went from 97% to 7% in support of the Second Amendment, gun rights, and the public. That is a very big statement. Now, he's been trying to tout for at least half the time that he's been running for New York 22nd that he believes, he's a great advocate. He's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. Well, that seems not to be true. And it seems to be very well documented now that he is not A-rated by the NRA. He is F-rated by the NRA. He's single digits. He's a 7% in favor of the Second Amendment. Not many people are further against the Second Amendment than he is. Maybe Justice John Paul Stevens, and that's about it. So he's right there with them. And I think that's important for public to know, because a lot of people didn't get a lot of fanfare. The NRA hasn't gone out and done a lot of talking about this. I haven't seen the news media pick up on this. No one's really talking about it, but I think it's very important, especially in upstate New York and in many other parts of the nation, that you need to check this. They just changed their ratings October 15th, 3 days ago. And a lot of people don't realize that many people have had their ratings redone, especially in states where there are red flag legislation. And these legislators have had their rates downgraded because whether you know it or not, they're actually advocating against the Second Amendment. Even though they may tell you on a commercial that they're all for you and they support you, they're actually working behind your back to take away your rights. And you should know that. And I think that's very important. But that just shows, again, what I see with Anthony Brindisi and with Richard Hanna, is that we're seeing individuals who are duplicitous, for lack of a better word. They're saying one thing to the public, they're doing an entirely different thing. And if you look at the research, don't look at their commercials for 30 seconds that are paid for by their special interest. And that's true of everyone in politics. Don't look at that. Look at their actual record. Look at the history of what they've spoken about and look at what they're really saying and how they're saying it. Because very often when you actually pay attention to them, it comes out very clear, just like Matt Ryan, just like what we saw with Ms. Heitkamp and Feinstein. We're seeing that they're doing things that are harming the very people that they say they are supporting. And I think that's an important thing to point out. But we've talked about a lot of different issues here today. And you may disagree with all of them. You may agree with some of them. I don't know. But I hope to hear from you. And I want to hear what you think about it. Tell me if you think I got something wrong. Tell me if you think I can improve the show. If I can do something better with the music or the transitions here. But most importantly, tell me, what do you think? Especially since we're coming up to the elections. Is it important to have politicians actually say what they believe with clarity and be honest and incomplete, to tell you about the little secret agendas they have, like supporting a domestic terrorist organization that Matt Ryan didn't want to tell anyone about and tried to avoid saying? Do we want to know that, that Anthony Brindisi should be honest and say that he supports the red flag legislation and that's why he was downgraded by the NRA, even though he says he's a strong supporter of the Second Amendment and they obviously don't think so? Do we want to tell individuals like Senator Heitkamp and Senator Feinstein and the Democrats that you can't use women and minorities like this to just advance your political philosophy and your own political advantage because you're using people and that hurts them? Or that we're going to see, and shouldn't we say to people like Senator Warren, that if you're going to go out there and make these false accomplishments and say that you're something that you are not, that you're not a Native American Indian, and even though you're saying that and you're reaping a financial reward for it, because even though you obviously don't look it, you're just going to make that claim and people are just going to accept it. Okay. When it's proven false, shouldn't you make some kind of reparation for that? And shouldn't you apologize for that? Instead of doubling down and saying, well, you're just a racist because you don't understand that my 1/1000th of a drop of possibly American Indian blood makes me an American Indian. Kind of makes me a Samoan too. So that's just ridiculous, in my opinion. Maybe you disagree. And maybe we should expect politicians to not keep trying to push this idea of intimidation and violence and confrontation. Now the Democrats are getting a taste of that, hopefully, and maybe you agree, maybe you don't, maybe that'll stop that because it's going in the wrong direction and it's going to be a danger. Someone has already been hurt in Minnesota. 2 people in Minnesota, Republicans, have already been attacked by DNC. One is an alleged DNC staffer, and another is just a random individual who have attacked members of the party. And that escalates. It only gets worse. Now that Nancy Pelosi is feeling it, before it gets any worse, will they come and say, let's stop this? Do you think they should? So these are all the questions I have for you today, and I thank you for being here with me as I go through this and try and point out here some of the facts and the conclusions that we come to. You may agree with them, you may not, but I look forward to hearing from you, each and every one of you. Oh, and I should also mention, I have invited Matt Ryan to come on and do an interview. He can do it anytime he wants. I'm more than happy to do that, as well as any elected official or candidate as I have done in the past, and I always provide that verbatim. They know it, and I'll be happy to do it. So just in case they were wondering. But I thank you. I hope that you're going to have a great week. Folks, I love doing this for you. I enjoy your company, and I hope that you're all going to be very well. Bye-bye.